Have you finally gone mad?
You just made the biggest mistake of your life.
Are you threatening me? You think because you work at that bank now, you're better than me? You have the guts to disrespect me?
I asked you a question about the money that disappeared from our joint account, Tunde. That's not disrespect. That's called account. You've answered my question with your hand, so I'll answer mine with something else. Get up. We're not finished. We're just getting started.
If you're watching this from Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, Houston, London, or wherever you're tuned in from, drop your city below right now and hit that subscribe button, because what happens over the next 72 hours in this story is going to remind you why you should never underestimate a quiet woman who has finally decided she's done being quiet. Like this video if you already have a feeling Tunde has no idea what's coming for him. To understand how a Lekki accountant with a Taekwondo black belt ended up on her own living room floor, breaking her husband's nose with a single strike, you have to go back 3 years to a wedding at Echo Hotel that everyone in Lagos society still talks about. Not because it was extravagant, though it was, but because of how it started. Folake Adebayo Johnson had never planned to fall for a man like Tunde. She was the last child of a retired federal permanent secretary, raised between Ikoyi and boarding school in the UK, groomed for a life of quiet excellence rather than public spectacle. She'd built her career at one of Nigeria's biggest commercial banks from the bottom, starting as a teller in Yaba, while her mates from Queen's College were already vice presidents through family connections. By 28, she was a senior relationship manager, respected, sharp, and completely uninterested in the noise of Lagos dating culture. Tunde Bello was different from anyone she dated before. Charming in a way that felt effortless, ambitious in a way that felt exciting rather than exhausting. He worked in oil and gas logistics, or that's what he told her at their mutual friend's birthday dinner in Victoria Island. Dressed sharp, laughing loud, commanding every room he entered. He pursued her for 8 months with a persistence that felt, at the time, like devotion. Flowers to her office, voice notes at midnight reciting Wole Soyinka, weekend trips to Calabar and Zanzibar that he insisted on paying for entirely, even when her salary could have easily split the bill. What she didn't know then, what none of her friends knew, what even her own instincts, usually so sharp, failed to catch, was that Tunde's charm was not generosity, it was an investment. And investments, in Tunde's mind, always demanded returns. The first 2 years of their marriage looked from the outside like something out of a Lagos society magazine. Tunde moved them into the Lekki Phase 1 duplex through parties that made it onto Instagram blogs, drove a G-Wagon that turned heads on Admiralty Way. But Folake, sharp as ever with numbers, began noticing things that didn't add up. Not emotionally at first, but literally. The oil and gas logistics job that supposedly funded their lifestyle produced no consistent salary alerts. Large sums moved through his personal account in patterns that resembled something she recognized professionally, but refused to name, even to herself, because naming it would mean admitting what she'd built her life on top of. She started asking careful questions, the way a trained banker asks questions, never accusatory, always framed as curiosity. Tunde answered smoothly at first, always with an explanation just believable enough to survive scrutiny. But smooth answers, given enough time, begin to develop cracks, and Folake had spent a decade of her career trained to notice exactly where those cracks appeared. It was the small things that unraveled him. A phone call he stepped outside to take at 2 a.m. A business partner named Chief who never had a surname, never had an office, never once appeared at any event Tunde claimed to be attending. A young woman named Bisola who liked every single one of Tunde's Instagram posts within minutes of him uploading them, always first, always with the same red heart emoji. By their third anniversary, 6 months before the slap that opened this story, Folake had already begun quietly building something Tunde never suspected, a folder encrypted and backed up in 3 separate places, documenting every discrepancy, every unexplained transaction, every inconsistency in the man she'd promised her life to. Not out of vengeance, not yet, out of the same instinct that had made her excellent at her job. When the numbers don't add up, you don't ignore it. You investigate until they do.
If you didn't expect a banker spreadsheet to become a weapon in this story, comment the folder below, because that folder is about to matter more than anything else you heard so far. And if this story already has you sitting up straighter, that's exactly what it's supposed to do. This is only the beginning. 3 weeks before the slap, Folake discovered the truth about the 280,000 naira. It wasn't a mystery transaction, not really. It was rent. Rent for a 2-bedroom flat in Chevron Drive, Lekki, in Bisola's name, paid from an account they both owned. She sat with that information for 11 days before saying a single word, partly out of shock, but mostly out of strategy. She needed to understand the full shape of what she was dealing with before she moved. Because Folake Adebayo Johnson did not believe in confronting a fire with a match. She believed in confronting a fire with water, cold, overwhelming, and impossible to argue with. She began quietly consulting a lawyer, a former university classmate now practicing family law in Ikoyi. She began quietly transferring her personal savings, the inheritance from her late father, into an account Tunde had no access to and no knowledge of. She began quietly documenting everything, screenshots, bank statements, even a voice note Tunde accidentally sent to their shared family WhatsApp group instead of Bisola, a mistake he never noticed, but Folake saved immediately, hands shaking, heart breaking in a way her calm exterior never revealed. She wasn't building a case for revenge. She was building a case for survival, for the version of her future where she walked out of this marriage with everything she'd earned still intact and everything he'd hidden fully exposed. The night of the slap, 3 weeks before she discovered the truth, she'd finally decided it was time, not to explode, not to scream, but to ask, calmly, directly, the way she'd asked 1,000 clients about suspicious transactions across her career at work. She waited until dinner, until the house help had gone home, until it was just the 2 of them at the marble dining table Tunde had bought to impress guests who rarely came anymore. "Tunde," she said, setting down her fork with deliberate calm, "I need you to explain the 280,000 naira that left our joint account on the 14th, and I need you to explain Chevron Drive." He didn't answer with words. His face changed first. That familiar smoothness cracking instantly, replaced by something raw and cornered. The look of a man watching years of careful construction collapse in real time. He stood so fast, his chair scraped violently against the marble floor, and before Folake could say another word, his hand connected with her face with a force that sent her stumbling sideways into the china cabinet, glasses rattling, one crashing to the floor and shattering. That was the moment we opened with, the slap, the silence, the blood on her lip, the laugh that had nothing to do with humor and everything to do with the fact that Tunde had just confirmed, with his own hand, every suspicion she'd spent months quietly proving. And then came what Tunde would later describe, humiliated, to the one friend who dared ask him about his broken nose as the fastest, most terrifying 30 seconds of his life. Folake didn't retaliate out of rage. She retaliated with the precision of someone who had trained for this exact moment without ever admitting to herself that she was training for it. Her Saturday morning taekwondo classes at the Lekki Sports Complex, the ones she told Tunde were just for fitness, the ones she quietly maintained for 4 years since a terrifying encounter with a stalker in her 20s had taught her that no woman should ever again feel powerless in her own body, came alive in her hands. One strike to redirect his weight, one sweep to put him on the floor, One final controlled blow that broke his nose and made absolutely certain he understood, in a language more permanent than words, that Folake Adebayo Johnson was never, for not one single day of their marriage, the powerless woman he'd assumed he was hiding secrets from. She stood over him, breathing steady, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt something close to relief. "Tunde," she said, her voice trembling now not from fear, but from the sheer weight of finally releasing what she'd carried alone for months. "You want to know why I'm not crying, Tunde? Because I already grieved this marriage weeks ago. I grieved it the night I found Bisola's address in your bank statement. I grieved it every night after that, alone, while you slept next to me, pretending everything was fine. Tonight, you just gave me the final piece I needed, a police report for assault on top of everything else I already have." Tunde, still on the floor, blood streaming from his nose, stared up at her in stunned disbelief. "Everything else?" he managed weakly. Folake walked up calmly to the bookshelf, retrieved a slim manila folder she'd hidden behind a row of novels months ago, and dropped it on the floor beside him. Inside were printed bank statements, screenshots of the WhatsApp voice note, records of the Chevron Drive lease, and a formal letter from her lawyer already prepared for the moment she'd known, deep down, was coming. "Everything," she said, simply. "I've known for weeks, Tunde. I was simply waiting for you to show me who you really are, so I wouldn't spend one more day doubting myself when I finally left."
Comment below if you're proud of Folake right now, because she is not done teaching this lesson. Subscribe if you want to see exactly how this story ends, because the final lesson is more powerful than the slap that started everything. What followed over the next 72 hours wasn't a dramatic Lagos society scandal, though the story eventually did make its way in whispered versions through the WhatsApp groups of Ikoyi and Lekki wives. It was something quieter and far more devastating for Tunde than any public humiliation could have been. Folake's lawyer filed for legal separation within 48 hours, citing both financial misconduct and physical assault, supported by medical documentation from the hospital where Folake had her lips stitched that same night, and a police report she filed calmly, without tears, the following morning. Tunde's employer, the oil and gas logistics company that turned out to be little more than a shell used to funnel questionable payments, began its own internal investigation once whispers of the police report reached the wrong ears. Within a month, the G-Wagon was repossessed. Within 2, Chevron Drive's rent went unpaid, and Bisola, it turned out, had never actually known about the wife in Lekki at all. Folake didn't celebrate his downfall. She didn't need to. She simply moved forward, quietly reclaiming the life she'd spent 3 years slowly losing pieces of without fully realizing it. She kept her position at the bank, earned a promotion within the year, and used part of her father's inheritance, the money Tunde never knew about, never touched, never controlled, to buy a modest but beautiful 2-bedroom apartment in Ikoyi, entirely in her own name. A year later, on a warm Lagos evening with the kind of golden light that makes even traffic on Falomo Bridge look beautiful, Folake sat on the balcony of her new apartment, sipping chilled zobo, watching the sun sink slowly behind the skyline she'd grown up admiring from her father's old house in Ikoyi. Her phone buzzed, a message from a younger colleague at the bank, a nervous 26-year-old named Chamaka, who had recently confided in Folake about a boyfriend who sometimes got a little rough when he was stressed. Folake typed her response slowly, choosing each word with the same care she once used to build a case that saved her own life. She wrote, "Don't wait for the moment he finally shows you everything at once. By the time he does, you'll already have spent years doubting the small warnings that were trying to protect you. Trust the small warnings, Chamaka. And whatever you do, never let anyone convince you that your calm is the same thing as your weakness. Some of us are calm because we are already 3 steps ahead, building the exit before we ever announce we're leaving." She set the phone down,
looked out over the city that had watched her rebuild herself from a broken lip and a shattered wine glass into a woman who owned her own home, answered to no one, and had finally, fully exhaled. The slap that opened this story lasted less than a second, but everything Folake built in the silence before it and everything she reclaimed in the strength after it lasted a lifetime. And that, in the end, is the real lesson this story was always trying to teach. Your greatest comeback doesn't begin when life gets easier. It begins the moment you decide you've had enough. If this story touched your heart tonight, don't leave quietly. If this is your very first time discovering our channel, welcome. You're now in a community that believes karma always catches up, the truth always finds its voice, and every story carries a lesson worth remembering. We'd love for you to become part of our family, so hit that subscribe button and join us for many more unforgettable stories. And to everyone who's been part of this journey already, thank you. Your likes, comments, and support are the reason this community keeps growing, and we truly appreciate every single one of you. Before you go, don't stop with just this story. Take a look at the other stories waiting for you on our channel. I promise you, if this one kept you watching until the end, you're going to love what comes next. You won't regret it. Now tell us in the comments, what was the biggest lesson you took away from Folake's story? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Until our next story, stay kind, stay wise, and remember, karma never loses an address.